Hey, Guobqiu here. Today we're going to be looking at Jiaoqiu. In his niche, he is a very powerful debuffer. For example, look at this E0S1 Acheron with only 1 Nihility and a sustain 0 cycle MSC12. Okay, that team is maybe cheating with Robin Gallagher, but anyways. Outside of his niche, he is decent, and we're going to be looking at both his performance in his best niche and outside of it. We'll be looking at how his kit functions, why it can be so powerful, as well as his best builds and teams. Like and subscribe if this helps, and let's begin. Jiaoqiu is a limited 5-star Fire Nihility unit. He is our second of this combo, obviously with Guinaifen being our first in 1.4. Among base stats, his low energy cost is a real nice boon for his kit. For traces, prioritize his talent and ultimate. His skill and basics are not too necessary to level up. So onto his kit, and let's start with his talent. Jiaoqiu will apply Ashen Roast onto enemies when hitting them with his basic skill and ultimate. Ashen Roast is a universal vulnerability modifier, meaning all types of damage you do to the enemy will be multiplied by said vulnerability. So normal damage, crit damage, dot damage, even break damage. At 1 stack, it is a 15% multiplier, and every subsequent stack is an additional 5%. With the 5 stack limit, that is in total a 35% vulnerability. So a 1.35 times multiplicative increase to all your damage if you have no previous vulnerabilities. Ashen Roast will last for 2 turns, so make sure you are reapplying it in case of very high speed enemies, as that will refresh the 2-turn duration. And Ashen Roast is also considered as a burn, and it isn't considered as a burn when applying it, which means this debuff can ignore all burn resistance, even 100% resistance, which normally should nullify any burn application. And so as it can be considered as a burn, it will also do dot damage at the start of enemies' turns. 180% of his attack at level 10. Is not much damage, but it's decent over the duration of a fight, and stacks up to be quite a lot in pure fiction. And so his basic attack is very basic, but thanks to his talent, he will be applying Ashen Roast with it to the target he attacks. His skill is a blast attack and will apply 1 stack of Ashen Roast to the central target, but not to adjacent ones. However, again, thanks to his talent, he will apply 1 stack onto all enemies hit on top. So 2 to the central target, 1 to adjacent targets. And finally his ultimate. First, he will set the number of Ashen Roast stacks on all enemies to be equal to the highest number present on the battlefield. To say one target has 5, but the rest have 1, all enemies will now jump up to 5 stacks, which is very powerful for immediate AoE damage amping. Then he does some damage and activates a zone for 3 turns. A zone is a new word they're using to classify aura buffs like Rame's ultimate or Lawatch's healing field. Now when enemies are inside the zone, 2 things will happen. First, yet another vulnerability modifier, yet this time it's specifically for ult damage and counts as an additional debuff. At level 10, this is 15%, and this means a total of 50% ultimate damage vulnerability during his ult, and 35% for any other damage types in the game. So whilst he can buff any damage, ults get a little extra boost. The second thing that happens is that when an enemy takes action, they have a chance to have 1 stack of Ashen Roast applied to them. It can only trigger once per enemy turn, so it doesn't give multiple stacks for multi-attack enemies. But if you do manage to fail its application, multi-attack enemies can roll the chance each time they take action. And this enemy turn-based application has a limit of 6 times per ult. This limit is pretty chill in most scenarios, only really being a problem in pure fiction, but we have a solution for pure fiction to fix this. And his technique is a dimension technique, and it will do some damage but also apply 1 Ashen Roast to all enemies when entering combat. Since it's a dimension technique, this works on every wave. So if we want to get to 5 stacks ASAP, here's how we do it. Technique gives 1. Skill gives 2 to the central target. We can immediately ult thanks to his A2 trace, and thus his ult also will be giving 1 stack. If the enemy is fast, they'll take action, and thus max out the stacks to 5 for your full 35% vulnerability. For the A2 trace that gives energy is simple, 15 energy when the battle starts. This is buffing his starting energy in endgame to 65 out of 100. A skill with energy rope is over 35 energy, meaning skill into ult is thus possible. His A4 makes effect hit rate past 80% give attack percent. It is converted in multiples of 15% effect hit rate to 60% attack, up to 240% attack. meaning you'll need 140% effect hit rate to cap it out. And this buff sounds insane, and it is the highest attack buff in the game, but unfortunately, due to his multipliers and build, his damage doesn't actually go that crazy. But again, it's decent for a damage amper. Now the most insane thing is his A6. A6 means enemies entering combat get the maximum stack count possessed by a unit when his ult is active. So this is absolutely incredible for pure fiction, as every enemy coming in will just be slapped with a 5-stack Ashen roast to the face. This makes him the best debuffer in the game for pure fiction. And not only that, it works in waves for MOC. So if I have 5 stacks on wave 1 with my ultimate up and clear it, wave 2 will have 5 stacks immediately applied everywhere. Pela has to ult again, Silverwolf has to skill and ult, Black Swan has to skill and ult, Guinaifen has to reapply burn and wait for Firekiss to stack up. Jiaoqiu just sits there, sipping his boba tea. This is the best debuff uptime out of any character and makes him insane for quick clears. Finally, for Trace bonuses, he actually gets 3 useful stats, which is rare, being effect hit rate, fire damage percent, and speed. Now let's finish the kit with an Eidolon review. E1 is a 40% damage buff for allies that attack enemies with Ashen Roast. This is basically permanent and pretty decent. You also get additional Ashen Roast stacking with this talent, but this is kinda negligible, only being meaningful for the very first Jiaoqiu turn. It makes you get to 5 stacks without his technique or an enemy taking action, as well as making the whole field thus get to 5 stacks when ulting rather than 4. His E2 increases his burn dot multiply by 300%, making him actually very powerful in damage over time compositions, and even boasting some decent damage outside of it. I wouldn't go for it though unless you really want to run him in dot. I don't even want to talk about E4, and E6 is actually really good. First, some quality of life with Ashen Roast transferring upon death, but the real source is after. First, an increase to 9 stacks max of Ashen Roast, which makes the E1 stacking actually pretty useful. Considering talent level 12, this is a 60.5% vulnerability now, or 76.7% for ultimates. Secondly, each stack also now reduces all type res by 3%, so you now also get a 27% res reduction. Disgusting. So onto his build. Since he is a debuffer and not going to be doing insane damage, you'd opt for a 2-piece of Hackspace with a 2-piece of whatever has the best main stats and substats. For a 4-piece, you can opt for Win Set, maximizing his turn frequency for an Acheron team to ensure even more ultimate stacks. Outside of Acheron though, not so necessary. For Planars, opt for Sprightly Von Whack in my opinion. Pan Cosmic works too though, or even Keel or Fleet if you prefer buffing the squad. Von Whack offers some energy, which is most of the time irrelevant, but sometimes can clutch a situation, and it also allows you to outspeed any DPS to ensure Ashen Roast is maximized before their action. Pan Cosmic offers some more attack for Jiaoqiu, though insanely diluted, and some easier effect hit rate stacking. Keel and Fleet offer damage buffs to the team if you don't care for the others. Main stats will want you going for an effect hit rate chest, speed boots, fire damage percent orb, and an energy robe. These shouldn't change, there's no massive foreseeable benefit to replacing any of them. For a stat goal, opt for 140% effect hit rate as well as high speed. You want to be faster than your carry, but you want to be naturally fast anyway in Acheron compositions, keep applying debuffs for her stacks. And for example, if you run her with Sparkle, you want to make sure you outspeed Sparkle. But that can also be achieved using Von Whack. You can also go for a little bit more effect hit rate with his signature, as it needs 178% effect hit rate to guarantee, but it is hard to miss at 140%. Let's now check out Light Cones, starting with his signature, which is a pretty nutty one. First, a 60% effect hit rate buff at S1, because why not? Then, if you use a basic attack, skill, or even ult to attack an enemy, you have a 60% base chance to inflict a 10% vulnerability to enemies. If the enemy also has a dot from the wearer, there is a secondary 60% base chance roll that happens to upgrade it to the cornered state, which is an additional 14% vulnerability. A 24% vulnerability on Light Cone is pretty disgusting. Now it is diluted due to his kit also applying the same type of damage amping, but this cone is very powerful for him, and also any dot sub DPS. I definitely prefer S1 to E1 for ease of build and the possibility of using it on others. For other cones, his effect hit rate requirements are insane, so not having a light cone with it as a stat is even worse than on Black Swan. So Eyes of the Prey is his free-to-play friendly option. Tutorial is free to play too, but only available if you play the event in 1.1. And I guess if you have Incessant Rain or Reforged Remembrance spare, they also give effect hit rate. Now, if you have some amazing gear and fulfill his needs without a light cone, you can opt for the Resolution light cone, as he will prefer helping with damage amp on the team rather than boosting his own damage. For pure fiction, his best cone will be Solitary Healing if running him with Acheron, as it will alleviate the 6-stack limit problem with insane ult generation. Enemies will have max stacks thanks to his ult and A6, but more enemy stacks means more Acheron ults, and more ults on Jiaoqiu is also more ults from Acheron, and it's also just more break potential and damage. But again, it requires some hefty effect hit rate gear, and in other teams, it's not necessary to run. For energy rotations, Jiaoqiu will opt for a skill basic combo for a 3-turn ult with an energy rope and only 1 hit being needed. This can also be a kill. In 3 turns, you're probably getting hit, and if you don't end up doing so, using an extra skill can guarantee the ult if needed. Having to use 2 skills isn't that common though, I barely encountered it, and so this makes him effectively SP positive at 0.33 SP a turn. So how good is he? In damage amping power, he boasts a 1.35 times boost to all damage types, 1.5 times specifically to ultimates. With his signature, that's a 1.59 times and 1.74 times boost respectively, which is really powerful. It is on all enemies, meaning this works for multi-DPS comps and works for any DPS types due to most of it being a universal damage modifier. But comparing damage amp alone is extremely misleading, as he basically has infinite uptime on all of his. Let's take for example E6 Guinaifen. At 4 fire-kiss, she hits a 30.4% vulnerability. Comparing 35% to 30.4% is a 3.5% DPS increase. Comparing 50% to this is a 15% increase. So is Jiaoqiu only a 3 to 15% upgrade over a 4-star? Not at all. How the unit applies said debuffs and its uptime is just as important as how powerful the damage amp is. Guinaifen has the skill to apply burn, then the enemy has to take enough turns to reach 4 stacks, 1 removed if she uses her ult. A break burn can also make it a bit faster, but that's an extra variable. So that's 2 to 3 enemy turns, which is over a cycle in waiting. And guess what Jiaoqiu did? Absolutely nothing. So all of those attacks are versus 5-stack Ashen Roast, they'd have a measly 7.6 to 15.2% vulnerability with Guinaifen. Not only that, she does it to 3 targets considering her burn alone, and he does it to all targets. And not to mention his extra synergy with Acheron, as we'll see later. As for Pela, at E6 with S5 Pearls, she is hitting 56% Death Shred. This is a 42.76% DPS increase, so it's better than his universal damage boost unless of course you get his signature or Eidolon 1. However, again, we gotta talk about uptime. Resolution is 1 turn only, and Pela's ult is 2 turns. However, Pela without tutorial has a 3-turn rotation. Resolution being 1 turn means in AoE situations, unless you specifically ult just before every Acheron ult, she's going to lose a lot of this resolution uptime. And in other teams, you're going to lose out on it a bunch. Now you can be super fast with wind set and high speed to counteract this somewhat, but if we get high speed enemies, then Jiaoqiu's refreshable uptime with his ult's Ashen Roast stacks is going to be much better. Because vulnerability is still potent, and because of uptime, I calculated Jiaoqiu E0S1 to be a 19% upgrade to Pela in a ratio hypercarry team with Ting Yun, and that's with ratio signature boosting Pela's power. With Jiaoqiu on the resolution light cone, it was only a 10% difference. But again, quality of life is not able to be calculated, as this difference can increase if you don't min-max your Pela gameplay. For Acheron, it's different due to his extra synergy, and we'll see that in the team section, but it's much higher than 19%. So teams. Due to being a universal damage amper, anywhere you'd put Pela, you could also put Jiaoqiu. He isn't as SP positive, so it won't work in Jingshui or Lunay teams, but otherwise, it's a great fit. For specifically ult-based carries, he's even better. So Acheron, Yunli, Argenti, I guess even Yanqing works. The problem with these units though, barring Acheron, is ult-based hypercarries want ult-based battery units. Because what's better than damage amping my ult? Damage amping it, and also giving me 60 energy every ult, or giving me extra turns. That's Jiaoqiu's problem. He's buffing a carry archetype that really likes other things on top. Nonetheless, there are ways you can run him with them, and let's see how. First, I ran Yunli with Jiaoqiu and got 3.65k in Apocalyptic Shadow. It's a nice alternative team if you don't have Robin or you're using her elsewhere. Same thing if your Tingyun is occupied. If you are versus an enemy that hits you a lot, then Jiaoqiu can be more preferable over Tingyun, as those enemy hits can substitute for her energy. And breaking the boss gives Yunli 240 energy anyway. Argenti in Pure Fiction can use Jiaoqiu very effectively, as he gets a ton of energy already, and he will be spamming a 90 energy cost ult rather than his regular 180. If he runs things like Energy Rope and Thief Set on top, even easier. And this is very powerful because of the immediate 5 stacks of Ashen Roast, meaning Argenti is always getting a 1.5 times damage amp to his ults. You don't have to worry about reapplying buffs on him. And since enemy HP is increasing, and his 90 energy cost ult is not too strong, this helps bridge that gap. So it's in these type of niches where he can shine. Ult-based carries with ample energy, or ult-based carries that don't need energy. And of course, we have to talk about Acheron. He is the best support for Acheron. Vulnerability is missing on her damage profile, as she gets damage percent a ton already, has fine attack percent with boots and rope, has great crit and builds to further buff crit. She even has some res reduction too. And so vulnerability being separate to all of this is really great for her. Not to mention, of course, it being even stronger for ults, which is most of her damage. And the real source is that ult stacking potential. Every enemy turn, up to 6 times per Jiaoqiu ultimate, is going to be a slash stream for Acheron, giving him the highest Acheron ult battery potential in the game. This is not only good for MOC and Apocalyptic Shadow, but it also makes him by far her best support in Pure Fiction and makes her viable there outside of Acheron. Now, some people run the Trend Light Cone with her, and this does not stack with Jiaoqiu's Ashen Roast on enemy actions, as it's 1 slash stream per enemy action. The only time they would be is if the enemy has a 2 attack action, as Jiaoqiu would apply a debuff on their first one, and then the Trend user on their second one, but that is niche. However, Jiaoqiu thus allows Acheron teams to run better sustains or builds on these sustains. For example, you can now run S1 Aventurine and still keep the Trend benefit. His debuffs are always there for Acheron. No city uptime and downtime, no city planning on when to ult, they're there when you need it. So onto some simulations, and just to be clear, simulations aren't everything, so enjoy this big disclaimer. So I found that Jiaoqiu is a fantastic upgrade to either Pela or Silverwolf in the standard Acheron team if you do get an additional ultimate off. Replacing Pela for Jiaoqiu with his signature and an additional Acheron ultimate, which he would get, saw a 31% DPS increase in single target for Acheron, as well as a 60% increase in AoE. This is because of the much better damage amp, the additional ultimate, and the infinite uptime on his debuffs. With Resolution S5 instead on Jiaoqiu, I got 22% in single target, 48% in AoE. Finally, with the signature and the same ult amount, which meant I removed an ult that actually would have happened, you get 5% in single target, 32% in AoE. The reason I remove ults is to simulate when an ult wouldn't have mattered, like you clear fast enough, or in the case you run a Trend Preservation unit, and maybe get lucky enough for the same amount of ults. Though that point can also kind of be favoring Jiaoqiu in the opposite way, as he generates Acheron ults sooner than these other units can, leading to faster clears in the first place. Now, one thing to mention before we go into Silverwolf is that AoE isn't really a department Acheron lacks in, as any fodder enemy will be obliterated, and AoE damage amp thus does nothing. This is especially true into Pure Fiction. But, considering multiple elite stages or triple enemy boss like Past and Future, the AoE increase is going to be a massive help. So with equal ult amounts, and replacing Silverwolf with E0S1 Jiaoqiu, we drop in single target damage, but get a 49% boost in AoE. With 4 ultimates, this skyrockets to an 81% increase in AoE power, with a decent 15% increase in single target. But yeah, Silverwolf is single target, as we know, so this was coming. I think the best team at E0S1 Acheron with 2 Nihility will thus be Jiaoqiu, Silverwolf, Acheron, and a Sustain for a mix of all damage types. Of course, Jiaoqiu Pela is just fine too. And for Pure Fiction, you can run Jiaoqiu Acheron plus any Nihility and it will work fantastically. You could even remove the second Nihility and go for someone that gets Acheron even more turns, as her ults will already one-shot waves without the 1.6 times boost. Finally, for E2 Acheron teams, Sparkle, Pela, Acheron, having Pela replaced with Jiaoqiu E0S1, resulted in a 55% DPS increase overall due to the extra ult, better debuffs, and uptime. Now, you saw in the intro my weird 1 nihility team, and it's just an adaptation of my Robin Gallagher team I cooked that I've been shilling way too much. This is a 0 cycle oriented team and requires luxury pulls, but you can 1 cycle without them. So in this team you don't get the 1.6 times multiplicative buff at E0 Acheron, but you get some insane action counts with Robin, and Gallagher with Quid Pro Quo will be making this even stronger. Though do note that Quid Pro Quo can be voided by Acheron as she doesn't use energy, so you gotta get lucky for the 0 cycle. The way it works is that Acheron gets so many charges from Jiaoqiu already, and of course Gallagher helps, meaning that we get weaker but more frequent ultimates than usual, allowing for 4 ultimates in these 2 cycles. You gotta play smart and not break enemies to allow slash stream charges, and you have to time Robin ults, but it's a very cool team when played right. I don't think it will work when we get tougher fights though, as Robin can't easily be healed by Gallagher due to her not attacking, but try it if you have the units. And finally, Jiaoqiu in Dot is kind of a trap. Some say he's a side grade to Rome and Robin, and maybe that's possible in min-max situations, but I found him to always clear slower than either of these units by a cycle. Maybe some showcase YouTubers will clear on par with them, since my simulations did show Rome and Jiaoqiu to be similar here. But in my testing, not so much. It's not too bad, but I wouldn't pull him to replace them. In the second slot as a sub DPS he can work somewhat, especially into Fire Week, but in and outside of that, Black Swan is there for you. At E2S1 though, he outclasses Rome and Robin in the third slot, but that is an E2S1 unit. So that was a lengthy vid. Let me know if you're pulling for Jiaoqiu or his light cone, and like a sub if this video helped. Thanks to my amazing YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a Guoba day.